Niall Stanage, associate editor of our sister company, The Hill, with us now. Niall, congratulations on the promotion from White House columnist. Learned that from the teleprompter. Of those three, what is the White House, A, most concerned about, B, think they can actually do something about?
I think they're most concerned about recession, but they're most concerned about that because that's the one they can least do something about, Leland. I think, inflation is obviously a persistent problem. I was just speaking with some Democratic strategists this afternoon about that. They're very worried about the impact of that on their midterm chances. And obviously, the problem with inflation is everyone knows how you stop it. You stop it by ramping up interest rates, which is within the Fed's bailiwick. But in doing that, you risk crashing the economy and talking about exactly the kind of recession you've just mentioned.
Bank of America, Deutsche Bank now saying that the risk of recession is much higher and, in fact, predicting one. COVID cases are also going up. Now, deaths are not, hospitalizations are not, but this was a president who promised to stamp out the virus. And Jen Psaki today almost seemed to say that COVID doesn't matter anymore. Take a listen.
It's also the case that despite all of the precautions we take, and even with the president being double boosted, he could still test positive for COVID, just as many people in the White House have, many people in the press corps have. That is a possibility, and we want to be transparent with the American public about that.
What is this sort of weighing of the politics of trying to protect President Biden from testing positive and protecting him to be commander-in-chief during a war in Ukraine versus the domestic politics of needing him to be out there and needing to show America that the president delivered on shutting down the virus?
So for a start, he wants to be out there. He's an old-style politician. He likes being out there meeting voters. He feels very constrained by the comparative inability to do that. Now, when it comes to COVID, we do have to stress the point that, as you noted, hospitalizations and deaths are not going up, and there is some very compelling evidence that this is a milder strain. On the politics, the White House, I think, is preparing the ground for the possibility that the president might test positive, so that if that were to happen, it's not seen as a sort of all sirens blaring emergency.
Yeah, so certainly you would expect the treatment that President Biden and his doctors will get with a positive test is a little different than what President Trump and his doctors got from the positive test. And at the same time, you have to ask, are they going to stop testing him day in and day out and stop testing everybody day in, day out as a way to not give it a positive test at some point? Because you test enough, you will.
Well, that's a good point, Leland. And one of the vaguer things that Jen Psaki has talked about is the cadence, which is always the word she uses, of President Biden's testing, which is a rather delicate way of saying how frequently he is tested. It seems slightly odd to me, given his age and the preponderance of COVID here in Washington, D.C., that he's not tested on a daily basis, but apparently he's not.
On the other hand, what good does it do to test him if you're testing everybody around him? In some ways, there's sort of this link, right, between COVID, hey, nothing to see here, it doesn't matter, even if he tests positive, it doesn't matter, and how they are dealing with Hunter Biden. This has been candidate Joe Biden all the way back in 2019.
I've never spoken to my son about going to see
And so how do you know?
Here's what I know. I know Trump deserves to be investigated. You should be looking at Trump. Trump's doing this because he knows I'll beat him like a drum.
He was right about one thing. He did beat President Trump. On this issue, though, of having never talked to Hunter Biden, that seems less likely given all of the things we now know about Hunter Biden's dealings and how then candidate Vice President Biden was involved in different things. That said, does the White House have a plan if Hunter Biden gets indicted or has some other pretty serious legal troubles?
That's certainly not something that they're willing to talk about publicly or behind the scenes. They are very much sticking to the point that President Biden himself is not involved in these business transactions, which is, clearly a valid point. I do think the Hunter Biden matter is a difficult one to talk about, Leland, because on one hand, you've Democrats saying nothing to see here, and then you often have Conservatives getting over their skis, claiming that there's proof of things that there is not, in fact, proof of.
Right.
But it is clearly an issue that's going to be an important one.
Yeah, and the Daily Mail had a story out today that the headlines are blaring about Hunter Biden, but then when you peel everything back, it basically all comes back to things that we already knew that don't yet get all the way to President Biden, although Hunter Biden seems to have some real problems. Category 3 storm we talked about, recession, COVID, Hunter Biden. We didn't talk about what would make it a Category 4 storm, which is the border come the end of May. 500,000 possibly of illegal immigrants per month coming over because of the end of the pandemic restrictions to sending people out. Is this something that the administration sees politically as a problem?
I think it is. I think it's something that they don't want to put front and centre. But clearly there have been preparations, the Department of Homeland Security and others preparing for the kind of astronomical figures you mentioned, 18,000 people a day. It was nowhere near that last year when you and your viewers will remember migrants primarily from Haiti gathering under that bridge in Texas. And that was a huge political problem for
this is video from the bridge, from Del Rio. And that was just sort of this would be like a minor rainstorm compared to the hurricane, if we want to continue the analogy, that would be coming in May, June, and July. It's an old rule, right? When the White House runs out of things, blame the media. This is the Deputy Communications Director, a historic confirmation. Judge Jackson is Justice Jackson, although she's not because she hasn't been sworn in. Historic low for unemployment claims, true, and record low unemployment, congratulations. Historic international effort to provide relief on Putin's price hike. Can't find coverage of it in any newsletter that purports to report on the White House, complete with an emoji. If you didn't know better, you'd think that would come from President Trump's White House.
Well, sniping between politicians or political aides in the media is a long tradition, which seems to be escalating all the time. And she's talking about a desire for focusing on the things that the White House wants to focus on.
I guess it's fair to say the honeymoon's over, right?
Oh, I think so. I think it has ended quite a long time ago.
Niall, have a great weekend. There's a lot to write about. We enjoy always reading your pieces in The Hill.
Thanks, Leland. Take care.
Have a good weekend. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.